what you're saying is that if you constantly are attracting someone in your life that is toxic, that's messing you around, it actually could be to do with you and your attachment style.
Yeah, 100%.
People are not going to like that.
Yeah, but that's where you've got to make the change.
So you believe that no matter what trauma somebody's been through, they can rewire their thoughts.
You can't build safety if you are in an unsafe environment. Trauma bonds, it's really, really related to attachment. Feels as if the logical side of your head is going, get out of this relationship.
Yeah.
Like, why are you still here?
You know, so many people carry this quiet belief that once you've experienced trauma, that you're broken.
What part of you would you say was rejected in childhood?
Today, we're diving deep into a topic that so many of us carry, but we rarely talk about in detail: trauma. And more importantly, we're exploring the question of whether you can actually heal from it. Joining me is somebody who's changing the way we think about healing, Frankie, who is also known as Frankie's Therapy. She's a HCPC registered psychotherapist, a trauma specialist with over a decade of experience supporting adults through relational trauma, anxiety, and low self-worth. Frankie talks about neuroscience with the deep embodied therapeutic work. She's trained in everything from EMDR and internal family systems to drama psychotherapy and somatic healing, offering a holistic, person-centered approach rooted in safety, relationship, and nervous system regulation. Today, she's here to change my mind on how trauma actually works, why it affects our relationships, our self-worth, and our sense of safety, and how we can reclaim all of those things. We'll explore trauma bonds, the brain-body connection, and why we stay in relationships that hurt us, and what healing really looks like, not in theory, but in real life. If you haven't already, make sure you've clicked the subscribe button, because I bring on experts every single week to change my mind so that we can learn and grow together. Let's get into this episode. Frankie, hi.
Hi, Shivani.
Welcome to Millennial Mind. I am really excited to have this conversation today because I asked my Instagram audience, what do you want me to speak to a therapist about? And almost everybody said trauma. And I think that when it comes to trauma, you know, so many people carry this quiet belief that once you've experienced trauma, that you're broken and that you can't get out of it. And I think today I want you to change my mind on the fact that we can. So give everyone a little bit of introduction to you if they don't know who you are.
Yeah, so I'm trained as a drama therapist. So that was my master's training. I've then trained in EMDR therapy, CBT therapy. So basically your drama therapy and your EMDR, it's very much based on the bottom of your brain approach. So you're very looking at like your nervous system. How can we actually heal trauma through our nervous system? So it's really based on this bottom up of the brain, and you can rewire it. That is like the amazing thing with our brain, is that through nervous system healing, we're able to rewire.
So you believe that no matter what trauma somebody's been through, they can rewire their thoughts?
Yeah, 100%. Maybe rewire their nervous system.
And how will their nervous system, if they rewire their thoughts or change, you know, how they feel around trauma?
So if we take childhood trauma, for instance, because that's the hardest to change from. So our brain is wired from the ages of 0 to 5.
Right.
So that's when our brain is built. So if we take childhood trauma, it's basically, we're looking at it's like two filing cabinets, and you're looking at when you get triggered. It's if you've had a very secure upbringing and mum and dad have been very present and very there for you. If something happens in a relationship, it's like the filing cabinet just flings open just a little bit. But if you've been through childhood trauma, and then you, for instance, I think ghosting is so prevalent now. Yeah. You know, especially with the dating apps and the dating world, I think ghosting is one of the biggest triggers that I come across, actually. So, for instance, if you get ghosted and you've had any sort of abandonment in childhood, your filing cabinet then flies open with a lot of the triggers. So many of these triggers of maybe somebody left at a younger age. So when somebody comes to therapy, they're looking at, okay, this filing cabinet has been flung open with all of these triggers there. How can we then sort the files out? So for instance, if we take ghosting as an example, it plays into a wound of I'm not good enough. Is usually which that belief has then stemmed from when we were 3, for instance, when we were 4. So we're looking at, okay, let's work with this 3-year-old self. Let's work with this 4-year-old self, so that when we're then in these relationships or dating and somebody ghosts, we're looking at building the cabinet to get to a more secure base.
Got it. That makes sense. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who do internalize that, initial belief of this happened to me, I can't even get over it, and so I must be broken now. Why do you think a lot of people internalize that belief? And what would you say to someone who's sitting there at home right now, who's stuck in that belief?
Yeah, I'd say through the drama therapy, like one of my biggest things, which I love about the drama therapy, is like the use of metaphor. And the way that I see it is it's basically we're looking at generational trauma, really. And what we're looking at is that this script has been passed down through years and years and years. And I think this generation is very much of the cycle breakers.
Yes.
We are stepping into this era where on social media, the cycle breakers are everywhere. It's so hard to be a cycle breaker.
Yeah.
We are not just breaking the generation before, we're breaking generations and generations, which that is one of the hardest things to do. So sometimes when you're doing the healing work, you very much have to go through the mud to come out of the mud. So if we're looking at that, sometimes when we're healing and we're doing our best to break these generations of trauma that's been passed along, it can feel so messy. It can feel like sometimes you can feel like you're the most broken through the healing. But because you're breaking it from all of this that has passed. But I think what's really big in that is you aren't just breaking it for you a lot of the time. You're breaking it for our next generation. But I do feel that because of the education that's out there now, which is just amazing. So I feel like we're at this point where our generation are one of the first ones to be like, oh my gosh, we can actually break this. We can, like rip them scripts off and then rewrite new ones, which I just think that's amazing.
Talk to me about generational trauma. What is generational trauma? Because I think trauma is what you use so widely now. People will say, I've got trauma from an incident that's happened. So can you define trauma and then also define generational trauma for me?
Yeah, so when we look at trauma, that's, usually a wound, really, and it's something that's happened. Okay. So it's looking at that, a wound that's happened in our lives, really. But when we look at generational trauma, it's very much, it could be passed from really, if we think about it, it could be passed from the wartime. We're only just coming from our grandparents who were in these war times, really. Right. So we're looking at, okay, what was the effect of the war on the grandparents? And then how did they react from that? What was then passed on to our parents from that?
Give me an example.
So, for instance, I think what's really massive is in them days, from the war, PTSD was huge. So somebody had been to war and they'd ended up with PTSD, and then there wasn't really the support that we have now. So then it could, sometimes PTSD could lead to schizophrenia, things like that. And then where looking at the next people, because it's not been like people haven't went to therapy in them days. So they've not worked through things as well, really, because they weren't able to. This has then been passed on to their children.
Right.
And then what happens from there is it's then passed on to the next children, really. Or we can look at that in relation to relationships. I think it's a massive one, even if we talk about feminism. Like feminism is quite new, really, when we think about it. So we're the ones who are now in this era who are, who've came from, a lot of us have came from grandparents who believed that they had to stay together.
Right.
So they had to stay in these relationships, even if they were really unhealthy. And, if we look at that in relation to, I think finance is a really big one in these, because actually a lot of women weren't able to work in them days. So they weren't actually on a physical level able to get out.
So true. It's really interesting, actually, when it comes to generational trauma, because I think people can experience trauma in different ways, can't they? So I guess, is it traumatic if I grew up in a household where my brother always took things from me and I felt like this isn't true, by the way, but if let's just say my brother always stole my toys from me and then he would take food off my plate, and then, I don't know, when I was older, he would steal my actual stuff, like a laptop or something. Is that generational trauma?
That wouldn't be, that's like, that wouldn't be generational.
Okay, would that be trauma though? Like if it impacted me?
I mean, I suppose there's different degrees, isn't there, really?
Yeah.
So there's really different degrees, really, of when we talk about trauma, really. So there's varying degrees. I think what's really big is the difference of, I think it is thrown around now quite a bit, trauma, that the use of that word. And I think what's really different is if somebody's been through an event or something's happened in their life and they've had people, so it comes into complex trauma if you've ended up not having security around you.
Okay.
So, for instance, as a child, if you've not had the secure base around you, so say if something at school has happened and you don't come home to the secure base.
What's a secure base, though?
So it's caregivers who are there for you, who are really like consistently there. They're very like attuned to your needs. A secure base can really get built in therapy as well. So
this is really interesting, and this is going to be a bit controversial, what I'm about to say. If attachment styles, and we'll come on to that in a minute, if attachment and caregiving and all of these things are so important to make sure that you give your child a safe environment, right? To ensure that they don't experience any trauma, to ensure that they're happy, because all of these things that you're telling me, they really impact you the older you get, right? How is this working in this modern day society? Because women typically used to stay at home and look after the kids whilst the dad went out to go and work. We're now coming into society where both women and men are working because, the circumstances have changed. It's very rare to find a family. I know very few families, in fact, none my age, where the woman is staying at home to look after the kids and the man is working, because cost of living is crazy in the UK. So how are we actually meant to model this behavior with modern society?
Yeah, it's such an interesting,
isn't it?
I think we're in like the new interesting stages, really. And I think the big thing from that, and I think with attachment, there's so much out there now that almost it kind of can shame women as well a little bit.
Yeah.
And actually, when we look at these, secure bases, it's what the child comes home to as well. So say, for instance, if something happened in nursery, for instance, and somebody wasn't very, you could have a secure base in nursery as well that can be created through the nursery. But when somebody's been really mean to us in nursery, and we come home to somebody who then goes, oh my gosh, that was awful. I'm so sorry that you went through that. So I'm going to change this.
Okay.
So that is a very different response to coming home when you have not got that caregiver there. And that's what makes a childhood experience completely different. Because if you've came home and the care has very much been there and you've had really like attuned caregiving, you know, and that could be coming home ideally to the primary caregivers, but it can be, you know, you could be looking at other people within that circle, like grandparents, things like that. And very much like, I hear you, I see you. This is a safe place to come home to. But if a child has not got this safe place to come home to, their experience of the world become really, really different.
Is this where trauma bonds come in? Can you have a trauma bond with your parents? Because I'm not actually really sure on the definition of what a trauma bond is.
So when we look at trauma bonds, it's really, really related to attachment.
Okay.
You know, like a lot of the research shows how much it's related to attachment. It doesn't always have to be, just to put that out there, but it is usually related to attachment. So when we look at a trauma bond, so it's usually when you stay with a partner where you know there's abusive behaviour with that partner, but you stay in that relationship. And it's almost like this bond becomes really, you know, very, you're very attached to this person who's actually causing you a lot of harm.
Right.
So have you heard of Stockholm Syndrome?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's commonly used. It is actually different from Stockholm, but I think Stockholm is a really good metaphor for it, of, you know, where these people had been held hostage and actually they were still having empathy for the people who had held them hostage.
But isn't that just having empathy and being a good human and seeing a different side? Because I think in the modern day, right now, when somebody is rude or horrible, the response is they must always be going through something. And I 100% agree with that. Hurt people. We've all heard that before. But is that having Stockholm Syndrome if you think hurt people? Or is that having empathy?
So I think there's a real difference in somebody coming home and having a bad day.
Right.
To somebody being, you know, when we're in a trauma bond, we're talking about really controlling behaviour, really manipulative behaviour, gaslighting you, gaslighting, you know, everything that you're saying. So you're really questioning yourself within this. So, you know, it's really different to if somebody comes home and they have a bad day. This is talking about behaviour, which is really like abusive behaviour, really, that's happening. And actually, if we, you know, have, I think there's a lot of thing around like, having compassion and things like that towards, and I think it's very detrimental when you've been in a trauma bond. Yeah, because the anger has to turn somewhere, and usually that turns inwards instead of towards that person, where the anger should be towards that person rather than turned inwards. So, but because it's usually from attachment, we know how to internalize that anger.
When you say it's usually from attachment, what do you mean? Which people, and according to which attachment style, are trauma bonds most likely to form?
Yeah, so it's usually in relation to anxious and disorganised, actually. So if you've got anxious or disorganised attachment, because from the ages of 0 to 5, your brain has been wired on push and pull dynamics.
Okay.
So what then happens is you don't know. The caregiver at home is very inconsistent. So you don't know if that person is going to be there or not.
Okay.
It's very push and pull. So what then happens in a relationship like a trauma bond is this person, it then mirrors this dynamic. So what happens is they do the same thing. It's very, very similar to addiction. So when we look at it, it's very similar to what happens with slot machines. So what happens is, if you put a pound in and then you would wait basically for what's going to come out next. So the anxious person is wired to wait for this £100, to wait for this £1,000. Now, if the anxious if you've got anxious attachment, shouldn't really say anxious person, if you've got anxious attachment, and then you then put a pound into the slot machine and a pound comes out. That's quite a secure base. What's the fun in that? You know that you put your pound in and your pound comes back. But what you're used to is put your pound in and you're waiting for the next hit. So you're waiting for the £100. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, you're used to this. I don't know what I'm going to get here. You're used to this chaos. You're used to this inconsistency. If you keep putting your pound in, so often that's why the anxious attached are drawn to the trauma bonds more, because they're used to this inconsistency from how the brain has actually been wired.
If someone's listening to this at home right now, what you're saying is that if you constantly are attracting someone in your life that is toxic, that's messing you around, that's cancelling on your dates, that's ghosting you, it actually could be to do with you and your attachment style.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. If this is a repeated pattern. Like,
people are not going to like that. People are not going to like that.
Yeah, but that's where you've got to make the change. That's where you've got to, we have these choices and we have these changes.
Way.
And it's looking at, it's if this is happening, every now and again, for instance, and you're not really drawn to that behaviour, that wouldn't necessarily be you. But if this is a repeated pattern and you keep going for these toxic behaviours, and your exes were toxic and now you're attracting toxic guys, like there's something going on there. There's some deeper roots, really, isn't there, to why we're so attracted to this. And usually we're looking at how the brain has been wired.
What if you just had bad luck? What if you just are with men who are just pigs, or women who are just pigs?
So
is that possible? Is that an argument for that, I feel? Because some people are really unlucky. They just meet people who are, not ready for a relationship, not serious about them, have commitment issues, whatever it is. Is it always about us, or can it also be about them?
So usually we're looking at why we're drawn to that person. So
I just met them on a dating app. They fit all my criteria.
But then the difference is you get ghosted and the person with the secure base.
Yeah.
It flings open a little bit the filing cabinet, right?
Right.
So it just flings this little bit.
Right.
Open. And then they won't really bother with that person again. But if you've came from an upbringing where your brain is wired to know that to be love. So we know that the way that we see love is either, very
turbulent,
it's chaotic. We actually know how to navigate that relationship. We know how to navigate a trauma bond, actually. Yeah. We know what to do in that dynamic. If you give us a really secure relationship, it's like, what do I do here? You're waiting, my God, 100%. For the next chaos.
I definitely had that. Like what you're telling me, I 100% had that in a lot of my relationships. And actually, when I met Nikhil, who I'm getting married to in 3 weeks, I remember in the beginning thinking it was uncomfortable and weird because it was so safe. And I remember saying that I don't know what's going on here, because it was so safe. It was so normal. We never argued. it wasn't chaotic. And if we had a disagreement, it wasn't like this really high and then this really low. And I've never really said this before on this podcast, but I think when you've come from a really toxic relationship and then you go into a safe one, you question whether you love that person or not. And you question whether it's love or it's friendship. And I remember saying at the time, do I really love him because I'm not like in this chaotic state? It was so safe. There were no arguments. There was no up and downs. If we had a disagreement, we had a disagreement. It wasn't this, I'm not going to talk to you for 2 days and like, please come back. And it wasn't this chasing of the other person. I didn't have anxiety. You know, in my past relationship, every single week, I remember I would get this pit in my stomach and I would have anxiety. And I think when you've come from that into a safe relationship, you can question whether you love that person or not. You can question whether it's actually a relationship or it's a friendship because you're used to having this really high and really low. And it's like a drug. And you almost have to tell yourself that you were on a drug before where you were all the way up here and then all the way down there, because when you're in the middle, it feels really strange and really uncomfortable. And I think that is actually one of the hardest things that no one tells you about, is how to transition from that. So if people who are listening at home right now and are thinking, gosh, I'm in a relationship like that, where it's really, really high highs and really, really low lows, do you think they can change that relationship with their partner, or do you think they have to leave?
If that person is causing the highs and lows, and they're, you know, when we talk about with different trauma bonds as well, really, there's different, you know, some people would not be able to change as well. So you're looking at the willingness of, I suppose you're looking at the willingness of both people doing the work. I think, you know, if one person's going to come and do the work, you have that quite a lot in therapy, actually. It's one person coming to you. Where's that relationship going to go if you're on highs and lows all the time? And it can be both people doing highs and lows as well.
100%, you mirror.
And that wouldn't be a trauma bond. Trauma bond's completely different to that. If both people are doing these highs and lows, a trauma bond is not that.
Why? Because let's say you and I are in a relationship and I'm doing these highs and lows and so are you. Are we not in separate trauma bonds with each other?
It would be more, when we're in a trauma bond, you're more looking at a person who's abusive. So you're with a person who's being really abusive.
Right. And they know what they're doing, or is it conscious?
It depends. Sometimes it could be conscious. Sometimes it could be subconscious. Like it's really, you know, sometimes even like manipulation, it can be done. They can actually turn it around and feel like they are the victim themselves, and they are completely unaware of behaviour as well in some, and some might be aware of the behaviour. Yeah.
So can you have a trauma bond with someone you're in a relationship where it isn't obviously abusive?
So
like they're not shouting at you, they're not screaming at you, they're not hitting you, they're not like very clearly abusive? Or how do you define abusive, actually? I should ask that question.
Yeah, so I think actually when, I think what's really interesting is when we look at Married at First Sight, actually. And, you know, I mean, I'm always obsessed with all the Married at First Sight. But what I think is really interesting nowadays is when we look at the experts' advice and things, which again, I love all of that. But when we look at it, when there's been physical abuse, there's a lot of, oh, this should never have happened. You know, if somebody's went and like hit a wall, for instance, there's always this thing where they go, oh my gosh, this should have never happened. You know, how can this person have gone through this? But when there's been emotional abuse, because it's not as clear, the emotional abuse, so it could be gaslighting is massive. There's not this, you know, oh my gosh, this is awful that you've had to go through this. This is horrendous how controlling this person has been towards you. So I think we're still in that generation of actually like physical, even when we watch these reality TV shows where you see like physical abuse is seen as, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing. But
100%.
actually, like, what about the emotional abuse that's happening there in them relationships? It's not even getting, you know, hardly acknowledged, really. So it's looking at, I think emotional abuse is actually really hard to pinpoint when you're in a trauma bond. And because they're so used to gaslighting you, it can be one of the worst experiences to go through. Now, what usually happens is you have quite a lot of shame in a trauma bond. It's massive with it because usually their worth is quite low. So they then project what they're feeling onto you. So when they've projected these feelings onto you, you then carry their shame, which it's not your shame to carry. So when we're looking at this dynamic that's happening, we're carrying the shame so that we then don't tell people outside what's going on. Like that saying of whatever happens behind closed doors stays behind closed doors. That can be one of the worst sayings, because actually you don't realise what's happening. Your mind becomes very confused. Now, a really good strategy in this, I think it's the best one, because you're so confused in what's happening and they're drawing you in this, love bombing, putting you on this pedestal. And then there's little drops of devaluation. So when you have them little drops, you're like, whoa, what is happening here? So when you're getting them devaluation, usually what then happens is it goes through a cycle and then it hoovers you back round to the love bombing. So our mind is like, well, what has just happened there? And it will stop realising what's happened in the devaluation side. So when that happens, each time, write it down. So every time they say something to you that is, about you as a person, something that would bring you down, the biggest thing is to write it down, because our brain gets confused with the highs instead of
so true
realising the lows.
So true.
Yeah.
When I actually broke up with my partner, one of the things that I did, because I was honestly so deluded and I knew I was deluded, I wrote down a list of things that had happened. And I remember looking at that piece of paper and seeing it and thinking, I am such an idiot. And why have I not left? And I just remember reading this long list. And I remember also writing a list of all the nice things that had happened. But the bad things far outweighed the right things. And sometimes when you look at a piece of paper and it's written in front of you and it's actually a fact, your brain can't convince you that they did it for a reason. It's just look at the facts. What did they do? And then compare it to all the good times also. I think that's really important as well when you're in that state of confusion. But if someone's stuck in a trauma bond right now and they are a little bit confused about how to handle it, what would you recommend they do?
I'd say the biggest thing, and healing from trauma bonds as well, your main thing is therapy is huge when it comes to trauma bonds. You need a professional really to see the dynamics that's happening, because often if you're surrounded by people who don't really understand the education behind it, they can enable the behaviour.
What if you can't afford therapy?
I'd say the biggest thing is educating yourself. So I think education is massive now, and it's actually bringing you to the awareness really of what's happening. I would say, if you did have that support network around you of friends who would get it, I think the thing with friends is sometimes they might not understand what's happening.
Yeah.
And that's where things become quite, I've heard things be said oh, well, everybody has red flags. And actually that can be one of the most detrimental things to somebody going through a trauma bond. So that's where the thing becomes really even a few sessions with a professional can see that dynamic, because when you go to the therapist, you can say exactly what has happened. And what usually happens when we're dealing with clients who've been through a trauma bond, they say what's happened and they don't see it as abuse. And when it's mirrored back to them of exactly what's happened, it's then almost like these light bulbs are going off, and that's the moment when the awareness
so true
is coming in. So one of the worst things that can happen is you're around people who they could be in toxic relationships themselves, or they could be, like not, not educated on what's going on. And sometimes that can enable behavior.
Yeah. It's so true. I mean, the example I always give, I fundamentally do not believe that when you have a problem in your relationship, I do not think that you should go and ask multiple people their opinions about it. If I was making a sandwich, everyone in the world has made a sandwich, I'm sure. If you haven't, then you're weird. But if you haven't made a sandwich, just joking. But when you're making a sandwich, if you were to go and ask 5 people how you make the best sandwich, they would all tell you a different answer. And it's the same when it comes to relationships, because everyone's got their own relationships. Everyone's had their own experiences. Everyone's got their own traumas around them. So if you go to 5 different people and ask them how you should deal with your relationship, you're going to get multiple different answers. Some of them might be the same, but only you know what is right for you in your relationship. And a lot of the time when you're going to friends and family and people, they have their own agendas. So for a lot of women I know that have gone to their parents or their friends, they've told them to stay in unhealthy relationships because there's this cultural pressure around it. When people have gone to, their cousins because they've stuck in a terrible relationship, they're telling them to stay in a terrible relationship. But then when they've gone to speak to a random friend from work because they've had a divorce, they're like, oh, you should definitely leave your partner. So everyone's got their own judgments, their own things that they want to tell you based on their own experiences. And I really do believe that the more that we sit with ourselves and we sit in solitude and we really think about what it is that we want, the clearer we get. I also 100% believe in going to a therapist. I've been to therapy since I was like 20, not 20, maybe 25. It's been so long now. But I know that when I speak to a therapist, they're giving me an actual professional opinion rather than one that's going to benefit them and me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's no hidden agenda. So I definitely do agree with you on there. What I think I'm worried about is for people who are listening to this at home right now thinking, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this situation. I perhaps don't have not only, the capacity to go to therapy, but I'm scared to go to therapy. And also I'm in such a controlling relationship that the partner I'm with keeps an eye on me 24/7. They're not going to let me go to therapy. They don't want me to seek help. What do they do?
I mean, obviously there's loads of support charities out there and things like that can help with that, and it's seeing emotional abuse the same as physical.
It is the same.
So it's looking at this and going like, actually, when we're looking at that, and that's why I'm bringing charities into it as well, because when we're going through them things, it might mean that actually you do need external help to get out of there. And there's, in the UK especially, not worldwide, but there's unbelievable charities that can help you get out of these situations. So, you're looking at educating yourself, bringing your subconscious conscious. That's massive in it. You're realizing, I'm going through abuse. So it's admitting it to yourself.
For sure.
Which is your biggest thing first, really. So it's the admitting to yourself of like, how bad this is, what's happening. And then if you're in a really, really stuck place, there's Shelter Charity, that's like one of my favourites. But they will definitely help you get out of these abusive relationships.
People who don't think physical abuse and emotional abuse are the same thing, I always give an example of physical abuse is literally when I hit you with a syringe and you see me stabbing you with a syringe into your arm and injecting you with poison. Right? Emotional abuse is when I put a tablet in your drink while I'm offering you a drink and you don't see it. And it's slowly, slowly dissolving, right? The injection stabs you and you see it. It leaves a scar, right? And you know that they're doing it to you in that moment and it's really, really painful, right? But the poison is in your body. The other is the tablet that you're drinking. But you don't really know that you're drinking poison. It might taste a little bit funny, but you don't know 100%. But the poison is still going into your body. So it's the exact same thing. It's just we in our heads sometimes need to see someone doing something to believe them. right? And this is why I really want to talk about the psychology of staying in relationships, even though you know that that person is abusing you. Why do people stay in abusive relationships?
I'd say the biggest thing is going back to childhood of what our nervous system is built towards. So I think what's really, really common when we talk about abusive relationships or trauma bonds, it feels as if the logical side of your head is going, get out of this relationship.
Yeah.
Like, why are you still here? Like, this makes no sense to be here. So your logical, it's like your brain here is going, oh my gosh, why are you here? Get out of this relationship. But your body is still there.
Yeah.
Your nervous system is still getting pulled towards this person. And it's quite common to have people say that they're like lying next to this person and they're, you know, really, really drawn towards staying there, but the head is telling them to get out. This isn't healthy. But because of these early blueprints in our brain of what we're used to, then we start educating ourselves and going like, whoa, this isn't a healthy relationship, but we're used to this chaos. So it feels very safe to stay there, even though it's very unsafe, but we know it. So that's usually why our body and our nervous system is drawn to this. So we go back for more, then we go back for more. It's exactly the same with the slot machine, really. You're going back to get your £100. It might just come this time.
And you believe that they might change.
Yeah, it's like being on, I always think it's like being on like a roller coaster and you're waiting for like the next loop to come around. You like the next one's going to be different. Like, you know, you're trying to fix this wound as well from childhood through that.
So how does somebody in that situation uncover that? Because a lot of people aren't conscious around their childhood wounds, right? So someone's listening to this right now thinking, okay, I think I'm in a relationship, let's just say with a narcissist. I keep thinking he's going to change or she's going to change, could be both. What do they do?
I'd say definitely the first steps is your education. And I think now we can go and get that education. So It is bringing it into awareness is your first biggest step, really. Your second one is realizing that actually a lot of the time our bodies are reacting in these situations. So our bodies are having is really big within trauma bonds to have gut problems because of the brain and body access. So if we think of it like so we've got the amygdala part of our brain. Now, that's the main part of the brain that you need to know. I always think it's like the main part where you go, right, okay, let's just focus on this. So you go, okay, we've got the amygdala part of the brain that is our fear center. It is there for a reason. So we need the amygdala part of our brain. Now, what happens is when we're in these relationships, we're in this fight or flight response.
Right.
Our amygdala is going like, it's like a little alarm going, do, like, you know, this isn't healthy. Now, what happens is it's there and it's related to the vagus nerve, which then is why we have so much problems within our gut. Because this is all related. So often what's really common is IBS is really common within trauma bonds. You know, any stomach problems can be that sign of that your body. Sometimes I've heard that body has physically shook in relation to this person. So we're looking at like these physical reactions as well that's happening. So, and you're looking at actually, you can't build safety within yourself if you are in an unsafe environment. Like, you just can't. Like, you can't be, your amygdala can't be going off, because it's telling you this is unsafe.
Yeah.
So you have to be in a place. It's I've done quite a lot of, actually most of my therapy has been with children in the care system. And when we look at that, when you're working with a child who's in an unsafe environment, the main thing is getting them out to then work with them on processing and what's just happened. As an adult, we then choose. So we then have the ability to choose our environments. So you have to get yourself to a safe environment.
Yeah. So is it possible to stop repeating the same relationship patterns? And if so, what's that first step someone can take?
Yeah, so it's definitely like 100% possible to. The first step is obviously if you were in a trauma bond, it is definitely your awareness to get out of that. The second step would be going back to your secure base. So it's then one of the biggest parts in therapy is the relationship with the therapist. So it's basically the secure base that's getting built. So it's what the therapist does is they provide consistency, they provide attunement, they would be there at the same time every week. So it's very much, it's very much this security, this consistent secureness. Now, usually when we've been through attachment, we're not used to that. So when you've had this relational with the therapist, what you're wanting to do is that relationship should then, something similar should be then created with your other relationships outside. So what's massive is the relation side of things getting built so that you then see what a healthy dynamic is. And that should then be taken on the outside.
But don't therapists just validate what their clients are saying? So if I came to you and I was in an abusive relationship, right? Or let's just say actually, I came to you and I was toxic and my partner was toxic. And I came to you and I said, he shouts at me all the time. He bashed the wall and, he did all of these things. You would tell me that's really bad and it's not safe, la, 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 la. And if he came to you and said, she's so angry all the time, she bashes things as well, aren't you just validating both of our experiences?
So, but because he's saying that she is doing that and she's saying that he is doing it.
Or let's say two people come to you and they're in a relationship and they both have a different perspective on the conversation. Because in every situation, there's my version, their version, and the truth.
Yeah.
So if both people have a therapist, isn't that therapist just validating what that client is coming to them to say? How do they know what their client is saying is true? And how do they distinguish between what's right and what's wrong?
Yeah. So with that, I suppose you're really looking at, in a therapy, you should be looking at their behaviours as well and what's happening in their past.
Right.
To not just see. So in a normal therapy setting, really, you'd be looking at both persons and it's about that person's reaction, really.
Really? You look at a couple together?
Oh, you could do. I don't do couples therapy, but people could. I would say definitely.
Yeah,
that would be the way to go. 100% would be the couples therapy, really. But if you're just getting your reaction to, for instance, I think the dishes is huge. Again, this is not trauma bonds. This is just in relationships.
Yeah.
So just in relationships in general, you're looking at say for instance. Something's happened and somebody's not done the dishes, for instance. That's really common in a relationship dynamic. And usually one partner is so mad that the dishes hasn't been done or, something's happened really, usually quite like, not a big thing. It's usually little things that's happened. And actually, we're looking at, what's happened before that for this violent cabinet to fly back out when it's about the dishes. Right. So obviously the easiest thing would be to say like, oh, well, go and wash the dishes, but that's not solvent. Then something else will come up and something else will come up. But in therapy, we're looking at, how, what is the trigger point there? What were you, as a child, what happened around you to be so triggered by when you come home, the dishes are just left again. And when we have these massive triggers to that, it's looking at, okay, what's happened before then to have this massive trigger to that.
So let's say I came to you and I said, my partner's such a nightmare because when I come home, the dishes are not done. And that's why I got annoyed with him. You wouldn't be able to validate my feelings actually, because you would then see me coming and talking about the same thing and being so triggered by it that you'd be able to distinguish that was actually a pattern for me, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you're looking at, actually, that's the 3-year-old's file sometimes coming up. How does that make you feel that the dishes haven't been done? Or actually, when the dishes haven't been done, I feel unseen. I feel like there's not been care about me. When did you not feel cared about before?
Got it.
So actually, and I'm working from this, you're working from this 3-year-old place.
Got it.
That goes, okay, like at that point, I didn't feel good enough. Let's look at that. Let's work on that and move forwards onto that. Obviously, there's then communication between the partnership to say, when this happens, I feel unseen at them times. I feel like this at these times. And that's why communication is so massive, because actually, I think what's common now is somebody being on the phone, actually. And what happens is that person's on the phone and they're not paying the other person a lot of attention. But actually, if somebody's, if somebody's not had attuned caregiving, that can be really, really personal. It can be like, they don't want to spend time with me. They don't want this, where it's all actually not being said like that. It's just, that's what they're interpreting that as, because they're working from this like 3-year-old place, this 5-year-old place, rather than communicating that with each other and saying, when this happens, I feel this way.
So step one for somebody who is stuck at home right now in a toxic relationship, or they know that they've got a trauma bond with someone, is firstly to find a way to get out of that toxic relationship, right? The second is to find a safe space, which is what you're saying could be really helpful with a therapist or someone, that's safe to you. The third step, I would say, is once they've found a therapist, how do you help them rebuild their self-worth?
Yeah, so I think what's massive when we come to rebuilding the self-worth, when we look at trauma bonds, the things what usually happens is in childhood we go to fawn response.
What's that?
So when we look at fawn response, it's very much like our masked self. So it's very much the people-pleasing version of ourselves. Like, I know how to keep this person happy. I know what to do to get my next £100 out of the slot machine. I know how to keep, how to do these behaviours. But because of that, what happens is we all have a masked self and a shadow self.
Everyone has a masked and shadow self.
Yeah.
Really?
And what you're wanting to do is get to shadow integration. So to get there, bear with me, is we have to work on the parts of us that were rejected in childhood. So we have to then go to, okay, the angry part of you that's wasn't allowed to be in these relationships. These were the parts of us that were rejected in our early childhood. So it's bringing these up.
How do I know what's my masked self and what's my shadow self?
Yeah, so that could be very much through, like, you could do mask work yourself even, where you could actually draw, so when we think of our mask self, it's very much the person that goes to an interview. So the person that goes to an interview shouldn't really be the person that's at home.
Why?
Because that would be a performative version of yourself.
I would say I'm quite similar to what I'm like on the podcast at home.
Yeah,
and in general.
Yeah, because you're very open, honest, but then you would have shadow sides that you wouldn't show on the podcast, like an angry part.
For sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that would be shown at home.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. In 100%. Relationships, yeah. So it's the angry, because you're safe to do so. So obviously you wouldn't go to an interview and be really angry because you can't show that part of you.
Got it. You wouldn't be as agitated, yeah.
Yeah, or if you were, you'd be like, contain yourself, you know.
So true.
Yeah, because you obviously, there's a level of professional side, you know. So when we look at like these angry and frustrated parts of ourselves, you know, it's looking at, okay, like these are all parts of us. And we need to work on, okay, a lot of the time, especially from our generation, actually, we're looking at good girl conditioning.
Yeah.
And be the good girl, be the polite girl, you know, this is good behaviour, this is bad behaviour. So we're trying to break from this good girl conditioning that's happening. So it's very much like, oh, you know, if you're the good girl isn't angry. So often it's looking at, okay, actually, that's just repression.
But but it's not a good thing to be angry, is it? Oh, nobody wants to be angry.
It's a really good thing to be angry and to express anger, but in a healthy way.
How do you express anger in a healthy way?
So the biggest way to do that would be body work. So for instance, when we're carrying this anger around, it would be very much exercise is like your biggest way to express anger, actually. You know, boxing is huge. Like, yeah, boxing is one of your best ways to express it. But yoga can really get them emotions out of your body. We are really looking at that, okay, where is it getting held? Can I then journal and where's this coming from? You know, let's bring this up. And it being a really, really healthy emotion when it's being brought up. And we all have these parts of us that need to get brought up, because otherwise, if we're not expressing them, that's when it turns to rage and it can be expressed in a really unhealthy way.
A lot of people have shame around their shadow self. You know, a lot of people think if I get angry, I'm a bad person. And, you know, when you were talking to me, there were so many different things that were going through my mind. One is like your shadow self is your bad bits and your mask self is your good bits. And when you said you're a different version of yourself on the podcast because I wouldn't get angry, which is 100% true. And you said you would do it at home because you feel comfortable. Isn't that a good thing then, that I can be myself and release the anger and maybe sometimes get angry? Or am I being abusive?
Yeah, this is so interesting, actually. Yeah. So it's really good that you can be yourself, right. You know, and that you're able to have this safe base, that you then bring all of these parts. But again, it goes back to not expressing it in an unhealthy way, but expressing the anger in a healthy way. So again, that's where you're looking at, you know, the body work and things like that. So you go, actually, we need to express this in a healthy dynamic, really. So it's not that, you know, if you were then really, really angry at that person and really abusive towards that person, that's then shouldn't be enabled.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
So what if someone's listening to this and thinking, okay, great, I'm an angry person, that's my shadow self. But listen, journaling doesn't work for me. Going for a run or boxing doesn't work for me. It doesn't release my anger. I feel like I really have so much anger that I need to release. I've tried meditation, I've tried tapping, I've tried yoga, all of these things. What do you advise them to do?
Yeah, and I think actually nowadays, there's so many people who say that they're doing the work and they're not doing the work. So they're doing breath work, they're doing yoga, they're doing these things, but they're not looking at where does the anger actually come from. So when we're looking at anger, for instance, if you did loads of breath work and you don't know where the anger's coming from,
right,
you'd be sitting there breathing, you'd be breathing forever, wouldn't you? Do you know what I mean? You'd be, I'm still angry.
Yeah.
And exactly the same, don't know where the anger's coming from. I feel angry, so I'm going to go boxing and then you get angry again.
Yeah.
Because we don't know where this is even coming from.
How do we know?
So that is where you've got to look at the childhood again. So it all goes back to, okay, when have we felt this before? So that's when now, if people are saying that, oh, I'm doing these healing works, I'm doing this to heal, of like, your yoga, your running, whatever. But actually, it's all just surface level. They're not doing the deep roots. They're not actually breaking any cycles. They're just doing these surface level things, really. So they're always going to be triggered.
Talk to me about healing. I hear a lot of people saying, I went for a healing session. What does that mean?
A healing session?
Yeah.
Oh, I've not heard it.
It's quite, I spoke to someone the other day and I was like, they went for a healing. What about Reiki? Do you believe in Reiki?
Do you know what? I've never had it before. Again, it's not that I believe in all of these things. So I believe in the yoga, I believe in the boxing, I believe in the breath work. I would believe in the Reiki as well. But it's because, it is basing it on the body. But in it, it's still quite at the surface. You're not looking at the root of why you're getting angry. We've got to go right back to our childhood self and look at these roots before we're just sitting there in, Reiki sessions, for instance.
What's a small way that people can start healing today?
Yeah, I would say it would be going back to what we were talking about and thinking really about the part of yourself that's been most rejected and bringing that up. So looking at, when we talk about self-love as well, I think, again, there's a lot out there on self-love, and it's based on like, I think there's a lot on there of like positive affirmations and things like that. But actually, one of the biggest things that you can do is just start very, very slowly and start thinking, okay, what part of me was rejected in childhood? Just what one part?
How do we do that? Do you have an exercise that we can do right now? You can do it on me.
To think. So what part of you would you say was rejected in childhood?
That's such a loaded question. What part of me was rejected in childhood?
So would you say, for instance, when you went to school, for instance, would you say that you were able to be angry, for instance?
I actually wouldn't say I was very angry as a baby, like a kid. I do remember actually one time going to hospital and my grandma was there. And because she was always really unwell and I was very close with her, when I would see her, I would just start crying. But I remember, I think I was maybe 7 or 8. I was very young. And I remember going into the toilet and crying because I didn't want to cry in front of my mum and dad. Because maybe it was
your vulnerable self.
Yeah, but maybe it was like, don't cry because you're seeking attention. Because I was the only girl and I grew up with 3 boys. And so I didn't want to be, I don't know, maybe the weak one. I would say that. I remember that. And then I think I think about being rejected by teachers when I didn't do my homework. And then I lied and said I didn't have my notebook. And then and then I was like, getting something out of my bag and it fell out. And then she said you would lose your head if it wasn't screwed on. And I remember in that moment feeling really embarrassed because everyone was looking at me. So that would say was rejection.
Yeah. And it's looking at, if we think of, I think the crying one is really...
But I'm emotional now. I will cry in front of other people. I don't mind. However,
you've done a lot of work.
Yeah, true.
So you've done a lot of things.
But I still wouldn't go on my Instagram and cry. So, when you see people who are videoing themselves and crying, I would say I do find that uncomfortable sometimes to watch. I would say that I do actually. Like I sometimes maybe do have that belief of, why would you upload that? Like, why would you video yourself in that state and then upload it?
Because really, Instagram is very much everybody's mask self, isn't it?
Right.
Not
That's
many
maybe why I don't
people.
think it's authentic. But maybe it is authentic to some people. Maybe something's happening with my body because I'm getting a rash right now. I'm bloody talking about this. I don't know what's happening. It's interesting.
Yeah. So if, it is looking at that vulnerable part of yourself, really. It sounds as if like, it's when we've been told don't cry because it's seen as the attention.
Yeah.
That's vulnerability.
Yeah, I guess I do feel like that a little bit. I do feel like that a little bit still, yeah.
Yeah, and actually, when we look at our shadow self, people think it's the negative sides, when actually often it can be the really beautiful sides of ourselves.
True.
It can be that ourselves that is so emotional about things and goes like, oh, don't cry.
I would say I'm very emotional. I would say I'm generally very, very emotional. But if someone upsets me, I don't cry. Like, I'll get angry. I wouldn't like sob. There's some people when someone shouts at them, they'll start sobbing. I would probably shout back. I don't think I would start sobbing, but I do feel very emotional when like I'm watching a movie or something happens or someone gets hurt. Like, I would cry, but I don't think I would sit there like hysterically crying. Or maybe I would. I don't know. Sometimes I do, I guess. But yeah. It's an interesting one. I'm just trying to get some prompts, I guess, for people who are at home. Because that's such a loaded question. Think about the time you got rejected. Like, how is somebody even going to process that question? It's quite heavy.
That's where it's to start really, really small, of even just what you've just done then, this small moment. So it is really heavy, actually. And sometimes that can be a problem with, as a therapist, actually, you don't realise how heavy the question is.
Yeah.
Actually, when I think about it. So, but it's that thing of starting really small and thinking, okay, what is this part really of just one part, and bringing that up to the attention, really. And maybe it can be, I think vulnerability is massive, really. So it could be bringing that up, really.
As a therapist, what has surprised you about trauma and the way that people heal?
Do you know, this is me going to be really honest here. Okay. So I would say that when I see people having done loads of healing work and they're in a really, really safe relationship, and it feels like this friendship, there's still a part of them that would still think about these highs.
Yes.
Of another relationship.
Yeah.
Because you cannot get that in these safe relationships. When you're putting your pound in, you will get the pound back. You will never get £100 from this slot machine.
So true.
So it's really sometimes, and that again is the beauty of going to a professional. Because people would then say, oh, well, have you got the spark? And the spark is actually this high chemistry. It's all related to our trauma and our wounds that have happened. So what's really interesting in the healing side is that you're in these really, really healthy dynamics. But there might be that little part of you that still thinks about the £100.
Has that person really healed yet? Because I would say that if you have healed, like, I have definitely changed my opinion about the whole thing now. Now I'm like, that's toxic and this is actually real love. Whilst before I would think, that's real love and this is friendship. So I feel like if you've healed, haven't you completely switched your opinion on the whole thing and you see it for what it is, which is a toxic slot machine that is never, ever going to make you happy?
Yeah, so that is when you have got to a point of where, that is like real healing, where you're seeing this, but it doesn't mean that you don't miss the highs. Sometimes it could still mean.
Some people do,
Yeah, true. Because that is, so it can still mean that high can still be missed, but definitely where you go, oh my gosh, no, that was just a thought pattern. And then it's that coming back to realising what you've got, really.
It's interesting, actually, when you're saying that, somebody in the question box said, what does it mean for somebody who's still dreaming of their partner, like their ex-partner?
Yeah.
Does it mean anything if you dream of your ex-partner?
So sometimes I think it's that.
Do dreams mean anything? I don't know.
Yeah, I think dreams can mean quite a lot, actually. I
Really?
think dreams can be, it can be a real way of processing things, because in our sleep, we have REM sleep, which is where basically it's where we're processing things in our sleep. So sometimes it might just be that you're processing things from the past as well. So it can mean, I'm just processing this as well. So it's looking at that side of things really as well.
I always dream of actually failing my exams. Maybe I'm still processing that one, because I dream about it like every week. I'm like, you're not in school. Like you're a grown adult. It's fine. Everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you one final thing, because I do think that people get attachment confused with safety. What is the difference between someone being attached and someone feeling safe?
I'd say that is exactly probably just what we've spoke about really, of we can have these attachments to people that are really unhealthy.
Yeah.
So we have these attachments and we're really drawn to them. So if we look at attraction, for instance, and the word attract, it means pull towards.
Yeah.
So if we look at what we're pulled towards, and we go, okay, like I'm pulled towards, I'm attracted to this person. So we look at this and then we go, then I form an attachment with that person. But then if we've got the, that doesn't mean that this person is safe. So it's looking at the, then bringing it back to the secure base again and bringing it back to actually, okay, what's actual safety? It's the consistency, it's the being there, it's the attunement, things like that.
Okay. And what's the one piece of advice you'd give to somebody right now who's struggling in a toxic relationship?
I would say the biggest thing within that is to say, ideally you would go from a younger version of you, but sometimes that can be really hard to get to. So if you think of it as a daughter or a niece or somebody, a younger person, if they were going through what you're going through now, what would you tell them to do? What would your advice be to do? So often what happens with this is your advice would be, run. Get out of this relationship. This is so unhealthy. Now, you can keep using this question again and again and again. You can actually use that question in every dynamic. It's like my favorite inner child question, because if you're in a toxic workplace and you go, okay, what would I tell this younger person to do? And often, especially when we've not had a secure childhood, what we tell them younger people to do is very, very different than what we are doing ourselves. So I would say that is the biggest question to keep returning to. You can do it towards a friend as well. What would I tell a friend to do as well?
Yeah.
But I think that younger version, it really stands out when you go, oh my gosh, if my niece was going through this, I would tell her to run.
Yeah, so true.
Why is she in this? So I'd always come back to that. And you can come back in every, in every aspect of life, really, with that question.
I guess because so many of us have compassion for other people.
Yeah.
But we don't have compassion for ourselves.
100%.
And so we look out for other people a lot more. We tell them not to do the things that we know are bad, but we allow ourselves to do them because we don't love ourselves enough. And
100%.
I think that's why that always happens. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it. I know it took you 6 hours to get here today, but we got there in the end. So thank you so much.
Oh, it's been so lovely as well.